It was a cold December morning in 1968 when fear crept quietly into a quiet American suburb. Barbara Jane Mackle was 20 years old, a bright, well-mannered university student with a promising future ahead of her. It was the Christmas season, and all she wanted was to be home. But destiny had other plans. Barbara and her mother, Jane, were driving to Atlanta, Georgia. The young woman had fallen ill with the flu during her studies at Emory University, and her mother had come to take her home. Because of Barbara's fever, they stopped for the night at a small motel in Decatur, just a short distance from campus. The motel was plain, anonymous, the kind of place where hundreds of travelers passed unnoticed. That night, however, something horrific was waiting behind its door. It was past midnight when someone knocked. The sound was sharp and urgent. Jane Mackle hesitated before opening the door. Through the peephole, she saw two figures dressed as police officers. One of them claimed they were looking for a young man injured in an accident, someone who matched the description of Barbara's boyfriend. The mother's concern overpowered her caution. She unlatched the door. The moment she did, the nightmare began. The man pushed forward violently, and the woman with him pointed a gun. The intruders were not officers, they were criminals. Before either Barbara or her mother could react, they were bound and gagged. The man introduced himself as George and told them calmly that no one would be hurt if they cooperated. It was a lie. The pair of imposters were Gary Stephen Christ and Ruth Eismanshire, both young and desperate for money. They had spent months planning what they called the perfect kidnapping. Barbara Mackle, the daughter of a wealthy Florida land developer, was their chosen target. Kristen Eisman forced a sedative into Barbara's mouth, drugging her until she drifted into confusion. When she woke, she found herself in the back of a car, her wrists taped, her eyes covered. The vehicle drove endlessly through the dark Georgia countryside. Every sound, the tires crushing gravel, the low hum of the engine, echoed like a countdown to something unthinkable. At dawn, the car stopped. The kidnappers dragged Barbara out and forced her to walk through cold mud toward a forest clearing. There, a shallow pit had already been dug. Beside it sat a long wooden box, painted white, lined with fiberglass, fitted with a small light, a fan, and two air pipes. To anyone else, it might have looked like a coffin. To Barbara, it was worse. It was her prison. Gary Christ instructed her to climb inside. His voice was calm, almost polite. He gave her a small container of water, some food, and a few books to pass the time. He even handed her a blanket. Then, before closing the lid, he said, "Don't breathe too fast, or you'll use up the air." She wanted to scream, to beg, but shock froze her words. The lid shut. Darkness swallowed her. She heard the rattle of dirt being shoveled onto the box, then silence. Barbara Mackle was buried alive. Above ground, Chris drove away to deliver his ransom note. He demanded $500,000 in cash from Barbara's father, Robert Mackle, a sum that would equal several million today. The note promised that Barbara was alive and safe, and that she would be released once the money was delivered exactly as instructed. If the police interfered, she would die underground. When the news reached the Mackle family, panic turned quickly to action. Robert Mackle was one of Florida's most prominent businessmen. He raised the ransom money immediately and followed every instruction, hoping to save his daughter's life. The FBI joined the case quietly, knowing that one mistake could cost Barbara her last breath. Meanwhile, deep under the ground, Barbara lay still in total darkness. The box was cramped. She could barely move. A small fan brought in thin air through the pipes, but every minute felt heavier than the last. She thought of her mother, who had been left tied up in the motel room but had managed to survive. She wondered if she would ever see daylight again. The hours turned to days. Inside her tomb, Barbara wrote messages on the pages of the book Gary Christ had left her. "Please hurry," one note read. "I'm alive." The light flickered weakly. The air grew stale. Her body ached from the cold and from fear. Yet, somehow she held on. Christ and Eisman, however, were falling apart. They attempted to collect the ransom, but their plans unraveled when the FBI arrived too quickly at the pickup point. In panic, the two split up. Ruth Eisman fled south, while Gary Christ tried to hide in the Florida swamps. Taking the ransom money with him, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts in Georgia's history. Helicopters searched the forests. Agents combed through lakes and back roads, tracking every clue. For Barbara's parents, every hour felt like a lifetime. They didn't know if she was still alive, and neither did the agents. On the third day, a break came. Acting on a tip, police found Gary Christ's car abandoned near a dirt road. Inside it, they discovered a map with hand-drawn markings, a small X in a remote area north of Atlanta. It was the faintest lead, but it was enough. Agents and local police raced to the spot. The forest was silent except for the wind rustling through the trees. They spread out, searching for any sign of disturbed earth. Then one officer noticed two thin plastic pipes sticking out of the ground, barely visible beneath leaves and mud. He called the others. They dug frantically. The sound of shovels slicing soil broke through Barbara's fading consciousness. For a moment she thought she was hallucinating. Then she heard voices, real human voices, shouting above her. The lid lifted. A blinding light flooded in. Strong hands pulled her upward into the open air. After 84 hours underground, Barbara Mackle gasped her first full breath of freedom. Her rescuers described her as astonishingly calm. Covered in dirt, weak and pale, she smiled faintly and said, "You've come." Her endurance stunned everyone. The FBI rushed her to a nearby hospital where doctors treated her for dehydration and exhaustion. Against all odds, she survived. Gary Christ was captured within 2 days. Exhausted and injured, he surrendered without resistance. Ruth Eisman Shire was caught 2 months later in Texas after appearing on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list, the first woman ever to be placed there. The trial drew nationwide attention. Christ was sentenced to life in prison, though he served only 10 years before being paroled, a decision that still shocks many. Eisman Shire received 7 years and was deported after serving her term. As for Barbara, she returned home, forever changed but determined to live fully. Years later, she married, raised children, and rarely spoke publicly about her ordeal. When she did, she emphasized not the terror she endured, but the strength she discovered within herself, the power of human will when faced with death. The Barbara Mackle kidnapping remains one of the most haunting cases in American true crime history. It was a story of meticulous planning undone by human error, of cruelty tempered by unexpected mercy, of fear met with remarkable courage. But beyond the headlines and courtrooms is the image of a young woman lying motionless in the dark that lingers. Alone underground, with only 2 narrow tubes to the surface, Barbara refused to surrender to panic. She slowed her breathing, conserved her strength, and believed, stubbornly, desperately, that someone would find her. The FBI agents who dug her out that day never forgot what they saw when the box opened: a light still burning, a book filled with messages, and a girl who had refused to die. In the years that followed, the case was studied in criminology classes, retold in documentaries and books. Yet no retelling can fully capture the silence of that box, the slow ticking of hours turning into days, the fragile line between hope and despair. Barbara Mackle's story is more than a tale of survival. It is a reminder that evil can appear at the door wearing the mask of authority, and that trust, once broken, leaves scars deeper than fear. It is also proof that courage sometimes means doing nothing more than breathing slowly, one measured breath at a time, while waiting for rescue. As the camera pans across the quiet Georgia woods where she was found, the narrator's voice softens. The trees stand unchanged, the soil indifferent, But beneath it once lay a young woman whose will to live defied the earth itself. For 3.5 days, Barbara Mackle was entombed in silence. When she emerged, she carried with her the sound of that silence, a sound she would never forget. A sound that speaks of terror, endurance, and the fragile miracle of survival. In the end, the Barbara Mackle case is not merely about crime or punishment. It is about the endurance of hope, the patience of rescue, and the quiet bravery of a girl who chose to believe that morning would come. And when the first light finally touched her face, it was not just a rescue, it was rebirth.